Hey, good morning. Welcome back, y'all. In the past two videos, we have been deep diving the case of Cassidy Rainwater in Windyville, Missouri. And in this video, we're going to explore some of the other cases surrounding this tiny community, which, in my eyes, seems to be an oddly large amount for such a relatively small area. But before we start lining up those events to examine, we need to circle back to the cabin at 386 Moon Valley and the two vehicles that were parked outside before the cabin burned. Vehicles that could prove a direct connection between James Phelps and Timothy Norton and two well-known cold cases, the case of Angela Hammond and the case of the Springfield Three. Photos taken on the property shows an old weathered green Ford truck with a busted back window, as well as an older model green and white van. But we'll start with Angela and that green truck. About 11:15 p.m. on April 4th, 1991, 20-year-old Angela Hammond, who was 4 months pregnant at the time, walked to a payphone at the corner of 2nd and Jefferson Street in Clinton, Missouri, to call her fiancé, Rob Schaefer. While they were on the phone, Angela mentioned a green truck that had circled a few times and just didn't look right. She described the truck as an older green Ford pickup with a large fish decal on the back window, driven by a filthy bearded man. This filthy bearded man parked and used the phone next to Angela. Then he walked back to his truck, seemingly looking for something inside with a flashlight. Rob suggested maybe the phone was broken and the man needed to use the phone. So Angela turned and asked the man, "Do you need to use the phone?" And Rob could hear him answer no. And then Angela started screaming. Rob dropped the phone and immediately jumped in his truck. He was racing to the payphone when he passed the green truck and heard Angie scream his name out of the window. He threw his truck in reverse to chase that truck, but damaged his transmission in the process. He chased them for 2 miles before his transmission failed, and he had to watch his fiancée disappear into a cloud of dust. How devastating. Angela Hammond has never been seen again and is still missing today. But that green truck with the fish decal, driven by that filthy bearded man, did become a focal point in her case. And here's something interesting that I was told. According to Timothy Norton's ex-girlfriend, that old greenish Ford truck sitting outside the cabin used to have a large fish decal on the back before it was smashed. Now, this truck doesn't fit exactly. It's not exactly green, but it does appear to have a greenish tint to it, like it could have been green once before it sat outside in the sun and the weather for many years. And it is a Ford as well, though don't ask me what year that is. Now, I'm not saying it is the truck that took Angela Hammond. All I'm saying is that it's a possibility that should be thoroughly investigated. And then there's the van. Anyone who lived anywhere near Springfield, Missouri in the 90s knows exactly where I'm going with this. This van looks suspiciously similar to the green van that authorities were looking for in connection with the disappearance of the Springfield Three. And the Springfield Three, also known as the Three Missing Women, is one of the most bizarre cases that I've ever encountered, and I'm not going to try to do a deep dive right here, but I will get to that in another video. On June 7th, 1992, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, her daughter, 19-year-old Susie Streeter, and Susie's friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, disappeared from the Levitt home at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, without a trace. There were no signs of a struggle. All of their purses and keys were still inside of the home, and their 3 cars still parked outside. There was no clue left to what may have happened to them. To this day, there's still been no sign of the 3 missing women. But early in the investigation, a tip was received from a woman who lived nearby, who claimed to have seen an older model green van being driven by who she believed to be Susie Streeter in the early morning hours of June 7th. She claimed the girl looked distressed, and as the van passed, she could hear a man yelling at her from the inside. Law enforcement looked hard for that van. They even set up a replica outside the police station that they painted the same color green as a reminder to the public of what to look for. There seems to be much more rumor and speculation about this case than there are actual facts. A gag order was put in place early on, and no further information has been released for the past 20 years. But I believe there's often value in gossip, and at least a shred of truth inside every rumor. And boy, have I listened to a lot of them about these women. Much of them revolves around Cheryl's romantic life. She was divorced twice, and in June 1992, she was a single, attractive woman. So as you can imagine, there is a lot of speculation about various suitors that she may have been romantically involved with. And a lot of that speculation seems to lead back to a man who once owned a Western store in Springfield. I'm not going to say his name because this man is well known in Springfield. Most of you can guess. He has many connections on both sides of the law, and it's well known that for a while this man moved a lot of cocaine through Southwest Missouri. He didn't think people knew. Everybody knows. And what's interesting to me is that there are various persons of interest in this case that has been discussed over and over and over again. but I never hear this man's name spoken publicly about this case. Yet privately, I hear this name over and over again. That alone made me look him over with a critical eye. And though I cannot confirm a connection between him and Cheryl Levitt, or what their relationship to each other may have been, I think the possibility of there being a connection is not something that should be dismissed. There's also been a lot of speculation about where these three missing women may be buried. And there are two places that keep coming up over and over again in every single discussion. The possibility that they could, one, be under the concrete of Cox Hospital, or two, under the concrete of that Western store. The only two places that were under construction at the time of their disappearance. Both places were asked to provide soil samples. The Western store refused. I also spoke to someone who was once an employee of Mr. Western Store, and they said that even other workers at the store thought he was involved with that disappearance, because there was no doubt, even among the employees, that he was involved in some type of underworld dealings. His behavior made it impossible not to notice, so I'm gonna tell y'all some of what she said. Allegedly, Mr. Western Store received phone calls in his office asking about the girls, and seemed very nervous and jumpy during the time that the investigation was in full swing. And allegedly, a few years later, the employee recalled an incident in which Mr. Western's briefcase was stolen out of his vehicle. She said, quote, "He was freaking out about it all day, and he was very shaken up. But when asked if he wanted us to call the police and file a report, he got more shaken up and refused." She also recalled another strange occurrence on a different night. One night after her shift in the 2010s, I guess. She left with a friend, and when they returned later for her car, they found a woman roaming the parking lot by herself. And there were no other cars in this parking lot except the girl's car that they were coming back for. And she said, quote, "This woman was dressed in Western clothing that appeared to be from the 90s. She was older and had blonde hair and a black cowboy hat on. We tried to speak with her, but she wouldn't respond and acted like she didn't see us. We did call 911 to let them know about the woman, but when I got to my car to leave, she started screaming, but without sound. I guess like silent screaming, like no sound. That would freak me out too. Yeah. She said that it was really bizarre and it freaked them out. That would freak me out too. Yet strange as that was, the next day at work, she showed up thinking the other employees would talk about it. Maybe Mr. Western Store would bring it up. But nobody said a word. It was like it never happened. And I just wonder, what did they see there? Was it just a random person behaving strangely? Was it a ghost? Or was it a woman drugged out of her mind? I don't know, but that is very strange, especially in light of the rumors of certain substances being trafficked out of that store. P.S. That's not a rumor. There also seems to be some strange connection between Mr. Western Store and Windyville. Perhaps even a direct connection to the cabin or the occupants of it. I can't say exactly what the connection is, and I hesitate to go too deep into the possibilities here, since the last thing I want to do is compromise an investigation on a case that I desperately want to see solved. The Springfield Three drives me crazy. How does three women disappear? How? But I can say that I've spoken to people in positions of authority who confirmed to me that the three missing women may be part of the ongoing federal investigation into what happened on that property. And I am told that there is still a ongoing federal investigation, so fingers crossed. I think it's safe to assume why they would believe that there could be a direct tie between this case and the Springfield Three. And it also puts some odd details about the response to the Cassidy Rainwater case into perspective. Because what else would prompt the Greene County Crime Scene Unit to respond and execute the search warrant alongside the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and the FBI? Except for credible evidence of the possibility of it being connected to a Greene County crime. And as the affidavit shows, they were there. I'm not sure the truck outside that cabin has anything to do with the disappearance of Angela Hammond, just like I'm not sure that the van has anything to do with the Springfield Three. But I do wonder a little bit more about that one. But the obvious possible connection to those two cold cases, plus the utter conviction that Cassidy Rainwater was not the only victim of James Phelps and Timothy Norton, made me want to take a good look at other cold cases around the Ozarks that could possibly lead me back to the cabin. First began looking at unsolved and strange cases in close vicinity to the area. And what I found was a startling amount of brutality in very small and sparsely populated areas. Violence that seems to erupt at a bizarrely high rate, and often in bizarrely close proximity or in bizarrely close relation. And while not all of these cases will be connected to Cassidy's case or the people involved in any way, I believe there's a lot to be learned just from observing the other incidents in the area. And I also believe there's much to be learned in what has happened to Cassidy Rainwater's family. Because if it's not odd enough that before Cassidy was brutally murdered, dismembered, and cut up for meat, her mother also disappeared and was later found deceased, 2 of Cassidy's cousins also passed under mysterious circumstances. 2 years after Cassidy's death in June 2021, in May 2023, her 33-year-old cousin, Lacey Rich of Urbana, Missouri, lost her life after she allegedly jumped from a moving semi on Highway 54 outside Woblo at 3 a.m. When she jumped, she was struck by the wheels of the trailer and then struck by another car. A tragedy that needs to be looked at closer than it was. Because what would cause her to jump, knowing the risk in doing so? And what if, like many suspect, she didn't jump? What if she was pushed? The driver of that semi was a 52-year-old man with the initials DT of Urbana, a man with pending sexual assault charges against a minor, and not just any minor, okay, but of a direct family member of Lacey's. So why would she be in the truck with him to begin with? Did she enter that semi willingly, or was she forced inside? Wherever they were headed, it's very clear that she had no intention of going wherever it was he was taking her. So many questions, and my heart breaks for that family. Then in 2017, another of Cassidy's cousins, Jason Paul Campbell, who lived very close to the cabin, very close, was served papers by the sheriff, who was the last person to see him alive. Directly after, Jason came up missing. His remains were later found on his own property where, according to the official record, he shot himself. And then somehow his hogs managed to get out and eat him. Eaten by his own hogs? Are you kidding me? That seems highly suspicious to me. But I was told by a family member that they do believe his death was a suicide. The papers he was served with shows that he was being charged with crimes against children. And that is likely why he took his own life. And that does make sense. And I do believe them. But I've also heard from others who believe wholeheartedly that Jason Paul Campbell didn't die at all, but that for some reason or another, with the help of the sheriff, he faked his own death and skipped town. Could that be true? I don't know. It sounds far-fetched, but something to keep in mind, just in case. The various strange and untimely deaths of so many members of the Rainwater family could very well just be sad and unfortunate coincidences. But I can't shake the suspicion that that's too much to be the work of chance. And I think we should ask ourselves, is there a possibility that they were being targeted for some reason or another? Because as we know, Cassidy had several children. She also has several siblings. And I will freak out if anything happens to one single hair on any of their heads. But let's look at some of the other crimes. In the early morning hours of Christmas Day in 2006, 39-year-old Lisa Jennings of Buffalo was found dead in her home by her husband, Brad. Her death was initially ruled a suicide. But her sister went to the Missouri Highway Patrol to express her and Lisa's daughter's belief that Lisa had actually been murdered. After some investigation, Brad was arrested. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. But 8 years later, his conviction was overturned when a private investigator and former sheriff set out to review the evidence against him and found that the investigating patrol officer hadn't run the tests that he claimed to. I think those tests were for DNA on his robe and also like a blood splatter test. It was a mess, honestly, and a pretty crazy story. And the opposing beliefs on what happened to Lisa really split this family apart. That does point to some kind of corruption in the system, because it turns out that Brad was pretty good buddies with the Dallas County Sheriff. And Lisa, it was discovered, was having an affair with her boss. And in court, it was noted that Brad's lawyer, a rather prolific criminal defense lawyer, did almost nothing for him, which is very uncommon for the man who has represented several criminals we've even mentioned, or will mention, in this series, and he goes to bat hard for these dudes. So the Jennings case is just really bizarre, and I really don't know what to make of it. But it is strange to me that this isn't the first or last time that tragedy would strike that family too. Lisa's sister lives in Windyville, not far from the cabin. And after she and her husband split up, her husband moved to Florida. She stayed in Windyville. Well, her kids went with their dad until her son became a teenager and him and his dad were kind of getting into it. So her son packs up his SUV and drives from Cape Coral, Florida, back to Windyville, Missouri. And he was only there for 3 days. 3. before he was found deceased in the river with a gunshot wound to the head. His death was ruled suicide. And to make it even sadder, this was once again right before Christmas. And there are some members of his family that don't believe it was suicide. They believe that boy was killed and that his death was not investigated properly. Then in July 2010, another shocking crime occurred when an elderly couple, 82-year-old Johnny Wilson and 76-year-old Colleen Wilson, were brutally murdered. And Colleen was raped after they interrupted a robbery in progress at their home just north of Bennett Springs. 30-year-old Jesse Driscoll, a career criminal, was later arrested for that. Then in November of 2020, a full decade later, the body of 33-year-old Nathan Andrew Young was found in a creek bed just off Kinfolk Road. This occurred very close to the location of the Wilson murders. And what happened to Nathan was especially horrific. It was found that his head, feet, and hands had been removed. This was a particularly vicious crime, and it appears that Nathan was the victim solely because of his friendship with another man, a man who was later arrested for his death. But I am not going to say that man's name here, because I was informed that there was a very real possibility that that man was not the actual perpetrator of this terrible crime. And the possibility of his innocence is particularly devastating in light of what happened in June 2023, when that man and Jesse Driscoll of the Wilson murders were both killed in the same prison on the same day. Those two had no clear connection to each other. So what are the freaking odds of that? Unless both of them happen to know the same group who wanted them both silenced. And I suspect that silencing was the goal, because just a year later, in June 2024, Jesse Driscoll Jr., Jesse Driscoll's son, was also killed in a completely different prison. Could it all be coincidence? Maybe, but let's keep going. In 2008, Marlis Portis Marsh and her husband were both found dead in their home near Windyville. Their deaths were ruled a murder-suicide, and though some friends have expressed doubt in that, the majority of their friends and family have confirmed that they do believe that is what happened. That Marlis's husband took her life in a very tragic domestic violence situation. But what I find suspicious about this particular situation is Marlis's connection to John, our third shadowy man. See, Marlis was of Native heritage and very active in the indigenous community. At one time, she managed the Southwest Missouri Indian Center in Springfield, an organization that John, and some claim also Phelps, was once a member of, and who Marlis Portis was at odds with, allegedly. And I also find it highly strange that there is some type of business operating out of Marlis's home that lists her daughter and John as the owners. That's suspicious, right? Then in 2021, 60-year-old Kevin Bruce Rogers of Springfield was reported missing. He was later found in May 2022. In a hand-dug well off of Long Lane, also very close to the cabin. While not a lot of information about him has been publicly released, I got some pretty interesting emails about Bruce. It seems he was quite the math dealer in town. Math, that's what we call it on TikTok because we have to use silly code words. It's meth. Yeah, so Bruce was a meth dealer, allegedly. And in 2020, he had just picked up a rather large amount of product, as in 500 grams of it. Now, I'm no meth expert, okay, but I assume that equals a lot of money. But on the way home that day, Bruce and a friend were pulled over. The friend that he was with attempted to stuff everything in a bag and toss that bag out the window before they pulled over. But unfortunately, another lady apparently saw this happen, and she walked up to the traffic stop, to the police, and handed the bag over. Both Bruce and the friend were released on bond, but from what I understand, Bruce then went to a new supplier to pick up new product and went about his little business, instead of working to pay off the debt he owed from that other confiscated product. And allegedly that original supplier paid Bruce a visit, gave him a deadline to pay. But instead of paying, he decided to pack up and relocate to St. Louis. And in 2021, he went back to Springfield for a visit. And on his third day there, he disappeared. Then somehow ended up in that well near Windyville. It's believed he was killed by a hotshot being injected with a lethal amount of narcotics. Then, very close to where Bruce was found in that well, there was the Bagley case from 2009. And this was an especially disturbing case where 5 men were indicted in a commercial sex trafficking conspiracy in which a 16-year-old girl was coerced into a Lebanon home in 2002, and she was held there as a sex slave and tortured during live sessions online or in person for 7 years. 7 years, until February 2009, when she was 23 years old, when she suffered a heart attack during a session. The details of what all was done to her is so horrific that I cannot repeat them. There are some things that I do not have the stomach for. But it turned out that some of these customers who were purchasing these sessions were well-known businessmen who held respectable positions. One was a national representative for disabled American veterans, and another was the postmaster of Nevada, Missouri. I also find it interesting that one of the men paid in meat, but exactly what kind of meat, it does not say. But that makes me suspicious. And if that's not incredibly disturbing enough, according to locals, that's not the only case of its kind in that area. At some point, another very similar situation happened when an emaciated girl escaped her restraints, where she was held in another home off of OO Highway. Though for some reason, that incident did not make it to official record. Surprise, surprise. There's just a lot going on in this little place, but this kind of thing isn't limited to Dallas County. I found similar cases all through southern Missouri, all the way up into Kansas City. On October 6, 2022, in Excelsior Springs, a 22-year-old woman escaped the home of Timothy Hazlitt. This woman had been drugged and held captive in a dungeon in his basement. There she was raped and tortured daily on camera. After his arrest, authorities found over 10,000 similar photos and videos on his phone of other women in similar states. And he told the woman who escaped that 2 other captives before her didn't make it. And he was later charged with the death of Janie Crosdale, who was found floating down the Missouri River in a blue barrel in 2023. To make matters even worse, Timothy Hazlitt had a child living with him at the time. He was abducting women, taking them to his freaking dungeon basement to do all these horrible, unthinkable things to them with a child in the home. I can't sometimes, y'all. Before living in Excelsior Springs, Timothy Hazlitt lived in Kansas City and in Independence. And he was also known to post in Facebook groups, selling chunks of rather suspicious looking meat. What kind of meat is that? For real, somebody tell me, what does it look like? My husband grills a lot, and that don't look like no meat he's grilling. I don't know that Hazlitt had any connection to Phelps, Norton, or John, but with the similarities in their interests, and because Norton worked out of Kansas City at Butler Trucking, it would not surprise me at all to find out that they did know each other. And it is also interesting to me how things seem to happen to people that know those two men. Like how just a month after their arrest, right after the cabin mysteriously burned down, Norton's cousin, Dwayne Dreyer, a Woblo teacher and coach, was suddenly arrested on sexual assault charges from 2011. And he faced similar charges in Iron County for forcible rape, statutory rape, and sexual contact with students from his time as a coach in 2007 and 2008. And I have personally spoken to some of his victims. I would just like to say, I hope that man rots in hell. Mean it. And while this one is a less direct connection, then there's the case of Dr. John Forsyth, a celebrated ER doctor in Cassville who also happened to be a cryptocurrency millionaire. He disappeared after a shift at Mercy Hospital in May 2023, and his body was found 9 days later in Beaver Lake, Arkansas, with a gunshot wound to the head. His death was ruled suicide by the chief medical examiner at the Arkansas State Crime Lab, despite the fact that John was found with duct tape over his mouth and the weapon nowhere in sight. To my knowledge, it's never been found. Now, how does that happen? And shortly after his death, it was revealed that he'd been abducted from the hospital just the year before. He'd been zip-tied, threatened, and then released. So obviously the doctor had some problems with somebody. That's some cover-up shit right there. But an interesting rumor that I heard was that Dr. Forsyth was James Phelps' doctor after an injury he received in 2019, 2020-ish. And Cassville seems a pretty good distance from Windyville for Phelps to go when there are other hospitals closer. Why did he want that doctor specifically? Maybe no reason. Maybe coincidence. While it likely doesn't have anything to do with what happened to the doctor, it is interesting to note nonetheless. And the case of Dr. Forsyth is a rabbit hole all in itself. There is a lot of weirdness about it. It really does deserve its own deep dive, which I do plan on getting to eventually. But that's just a few cases that have some type of obvious link or similarity. And when I was first working on this, I'm not going to lie, I was shocked by it. And it made me start looking harder at other places across the southern half of Missouri, especially any strange disappearances. And I found, once again, a shocking amount of missing people and similarities in crimes that made my pattern recognizing spidey senses go crazy. So I expanded my search again into northern Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma and the southeast corner of Kansas, and quickly realized, after comparing it to other random areas that I would pick, that this really is a highly strange amount. I really did think for a moment that I could have been seeing ghosts. Like I was just picking on Missouri. And I don't want to pick on Missouri. I love y'all. I love Missouri. There's so many fantastic legends in one place. Like, are you kidding me? It's a storyteller's dream out there. But after looking really closely and questioning my own motives, no, there is definitely something up here, y'all. And it's something deep and dark, and most people seem completely oblivious to it. And I, for one, want to know what it is. Why are there so many? Where are all these missing women? So I started picking up seemingly random cases from around the Ozarks to research. Cases that either did connect in some way or cases that I suspected could connect in some way. Even the cases that I would investigate that had no connection, but I looked into it just in case it did. And I began featuring them in videos one at a time over on TikTok. And that is how the Ozark series, as it stands today, was born. And I do plan on recreating a lot of those videos here because I believe that these cases are important. These victims deserve justice. These missing people need to be found. As I make them here, I will mark them Ozarks in the beginning of the title to separate them out from videos about other places and other things. So just know that if a video starts with the word Ozarks, just know to watch for any subtle connection to other cases in the series. And I also want y'all to know that some of the videos marked Ozarks may even actually lay outside the Ozark geographical area. Because remember, Ozark activity is not contained to the Ozark Hills. Just know going forward, if you see a video marked Ozarks, it means pay attention. There's something backwoodsy there. We know that there are other victims of Phelps and Norton. And I know that the three men that we've been discussing, Phelps, Norton, and John, are really just three small guys in a much larger operation. And though it is clear that Phelps and Norton answered to John in some way, even he can't be too high up the ladder. Because to be honest, none of them are rich enough to be big dogs. Big dogs don't go hungry, okay? Big dogs ain't poor. But I hope you'll join me in kicking over rocks all across the Ozarks and beyond, just to find out what's underneath it, to hold cold cases up to the light and re-examine them, and hopefully, with a bunch of fresh eyes, see or notice something that's been missed before. And maybe, if we're lucky, together we can find answers for just one family. Or maybe just save one girl from a similar horrible fate. Or help bring one missing soul home to rest. Just one would be worth it. But that's all I got for y'all this time. Oh yeah, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. And all the other YouTube buttons. I love you guys. Have a great day.